The wolf had not moved in 400 years. It stood at the eastern gate of the Winter Estate, carved from dark granite in the founding year of Hrothgar's bloodline. Not this Hrothgar, but the one 3 centuries and more before him, the one who had made the territory a kingdom by the simple expedient of standing still in the middle of a battlefield and letting the enemy run out of ideas against him. The wolf was that first Hrothgar's emblem, life-sized, its muzzle lifted slightly as though testing the air, its ears angled forward in the attitude of a creature that has heard something the rest of the room has missed. The court records noted, in the dry, factual manner of people who write down things they are not certain they believe, that the statue had been witnessed moving precisely once in the bloodline's recorded history, and that had been 400 years and 3 months ago, at the last confirmation of a true alpha bond. The current Hrothgar had read this record once and filed it as interesting. He had not thought about it since. The woman who stopped beside the statue had no idea any of this existed. She stopped because she had been on horseback for 11 hours, the last 2 of which had been through a snow that came sideways off the mountains and worked its way under every collar and seam with the methodical persistence of something that had been practicing. She stopped because there was a wall, and the wall stopped the wind, and she had one moment in which the cold became merely uncomfortable rather than actively hostile. She braced the iron box against the granite base of the statue, steadied it with her knee, and reached up with both hands to shake the packed snow from the folds of her cloak. The box was the size of a small chest, and heavier than it appeared. Its latch was cast in the shape of a wolf, devouring its own tail, iron-worn smooth at the join where it had been handled for a very long time. The latch had been failing for about 6 months, and she had repaired it herself with a length of twisted wire that held better than the original casting had, which she thought said something about intent versus execution. She had been carrying the box for 2 years. She had not opened it. She had been told not to by the outgoing archivist of her house, a woman named Holter, precise and unhurried, who had pressed it into her hands with the words, "You will know where it belongs when you arrive." Revna had found this unhelpful at 20 and continued to find it unhelpful at 22, but she was practical enough to have made her peace with instructions she could not change. She lifted the box from the statue's base. She settled her cloak. She looked up. The granite wolf's muzzle was pointing directly at her. She had not seen it move. She had felt a difference, some shift in the quality of the stillness beside her, the way stillness sometimes changed when you were paying attention to it. And when she looked up, the statue was simply facing her, ears forward, muzzle raised. The carved stone eyes pointed at her face, with an expression that a face carved from granite should not have had. She looked at the 2 gate guards. Both of them were staring at the statue with the look of men who had drawn a posting they felt was not going to feature anything unusual and were recalibrating. She looked back at the statue. "Is it supposed to do that?" she said. Neither guard answered. The senior one had gone the particular grey of a man who was going to request reassignment before he finished his shift. She picked up the iron box and walked through the gate. The Winter Estate was smaller than descriptions had suggested, and colder in a way that had nothing to do with the season. Its corridors were stone and function, lit by torches spaced with military practicality rather than any desire to make the space comfortable. The floors were old flags, worn smooth by decades of feet, with somewhere to be. The walls had no tapestries. The whole place had the character of a man who had decided very early that warmth was something you generated yourself or went without. She was directed to the record room by a servant boy, who could not have been more than 12, and was very serious about the responsibility. The record room redirected her to an antechamber. The antechamber informed her, after 40 minutes of waiting, that she used to complete a cataloguing notation she had been composing in her head since the 3rd hour of the ride, that the official who accepted sealed transfers from dissolved houses was unavailable and she would be seen in the morning. She was given a cot in the lower east wing. The cot was narrow and the blanket was thick, and she had been asleep within 4 minutes. The morning brought Archivist Holt. He was approximately 80 years old and had the specific ease of someone who had stopped being impressed by hierarchy several decades back and found the remaining years considerably more pleasant for it. He arrived before she had finished pulling on her second boot, sat in the room's only chair without waiting for an invitation, and looked at the iron box where it sat on the floor beside her bag. His expression was the expression of a man at the end of a very long calculation. "You came through the east gate last evening," he said. "Yes." "The statue moved?" "Yes." He folded his hands in his lap. 400 years and 3 months. I have been correcting that figure in the margin notes since I was 60. The count was less precise then. He paused. "Where did you come by the box?" She told him. He absorbed this in silence. "Holter's student," he said finally. "Holter's archivist in training for 2 years before the dissolution," Revna said. "Then the dissolution happened, and she put a box in my hands, and I have been delivering it ever since. She named you after the house. The house is gone. I kept the name." Holt looked at her with the eyes of someone who had spent 60 years reading records about things that hadn't happened yet. "You've been carrying this for 2 years," he said, "sealed, without opening it. She told me not to, and you didn't." Revna set her second boot firmly on her foot. "She trusted me with it," she said. "I intended to be worth that." Holt was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed in some small way she could not have named precisely. It had stopped being careful and become simply honest. "The box was placed in Holter's custody 40 years ago," he said. "Before that, it was in the custody of her predecessor. It has been in your house's keeping since the last Alpha bond was sealed, since the statue last moved. It was Holter's belief, and the belief of every archivist before her, that it would need to be returned when the bond confirmed again. They just had to wait for someone to bring it through the gate." He paused. "You were not supposed to know this in advance. Foreknowledge would have made you self-conscious. It would have changed how you carried it." She sat with this for a moment. 2 years of cold roads, the repaired latch, the careful practice of transporting something you don't fully understand and protecting it anyway. "That," she said, "is the most aggravating thing anyone has said to me in 2 years. "Yes," he said, "I expect it is." The Alpha King heard about the statue from Aldrin, who had the careful manner of a man delivering information that would require his superior to think and would therefore take some time. "The East Gate, Wolf," Aldrin said. "It moved last evening. 2 guards confirm. Full rotation of the head, approximately 40 degrees. The woman who passed beneath it was carrying a sealed iron box from the dissolved Revna house. She is currently in the lower east wing." Rothgar set down his pen. "The statue," he said. "Yes, my lord." Rothgar thought of Holt and the records room and the page he had read 10 years ago and filed as interesting. He thought about the phrase "true Alpha bond" written in someone's careful hand and what it implied about the present moment. He thought about the East Wing and the 40 minutes he had spent that morning reviewing supply inventories in the archive office, which he did not typically do. He went to the lower East Wing that afternoon. He told himself he was conducting a general survey of winter accommodation quality, which was something he had never done before and would not have done now, except that the alternative was admitting he was curious about a woman who had walked through a gate with a box and startled his grandfather's statue into motion. He heard Holt's voice through an open door and stopped outside it. She was sitting on the edge of a cot, still in her travelling cloak, which had dried in an uneven tide of damp and cold. She was holding a mug with both hands, not for the warmth, he noted. The mug was held with the same specific care she gave the box, which was sitting on the floor to her left, repaired latch up. She was listening to Holt with the particular quality of attention that meant she was thinking three things simultaneously and saying none of them yet. Her grey eyes moved to the doorway when he appeared. Not to him immediately, but to the space he occupied, checking the dimensions of the entrance, before they moved to his face. He asked Holt to give them a moment. Holt left, with the tranquility of a man who had arranged for exactly this, and would not insult anyone by pretending otherwise. Hrothgar leaned in the doorframe. She did not stand. She was tired enough that courtesy had been replaced by simple presence, which he found he preferred to ceremony. "You came through the east gate," he said. She met his eyes. "I have gathered this is significant," she said. "I have also gathered that no one is going to tell me why directly, which I find less useful than the facts themselves." He told her about the statue. He told her about the records, about the 400 years, about what a true Alpha Bond confirmation meant in the language of his bloodline's history. He told her without softening it, because she did not seem like someone who required softening, and he was too tired of the court's habit of wrapping everything in 3 sentences of preparation. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, thinking, not retreating. "I was shaking snow off my cloak," she said. "I know. I was not attempting to confirm anything. I'm aware. The statue apparently found this irrelevant." She drank from the mug. Outside, the wind tested the shutters and moved on. "I am not here to be anyone's fated anything," she said. "I am here to deliver a box and find a placement and be useful. I am trained in archival cataloguing and 3 languages and the identification of forged seals, and I know basic field medicine, and I am extremely good at being invisible in rooms that would prefer I were not there." A pause. "I would appreciate it if what happened at the gate were not the deciding factor in whether I am allowed to work." He looked at her. The single most specific physical thing he noticed, not her appearance, not the quality of her face, which he would observe over the days that followed, and find precise and composed in a way that told you she had learned what she could and could not afford to show, was the repair on the box's latch, twisted wire, neat turns, better than the original casting. She had carried this for 2 years, and she had maintained it while she carried it. He did not know anyone else who would have done that without being asked. "What is your name?" he said. "Revna." "The house." "The last of it." "Yes." He left. He came back the next morning, ostensibly because the archive office had a surplus of uncatalogued winter correspondence that had not been addressed in 18 months. He stayed for 2 hours. She did not ask why. Lady Corside had been senior lady advisor to the Winter Estate for 11 years and had the particular competence of someone who understood that influence was a structure, not a weapon, built with patience and procedure and the careful cultivation of institutional memory, maintained with the same meticulous attention you gave anything you intended to last. She had survived 3 estate administrators and 1 significant shift in the Alpha King's court preferences, and she was not susceptible to spectacle. She operated beneath it. She came to her conclusion about Revna on the 3rd day. It was not the statue, or rather, the statue was only the surface of it. The real problem was structural. Corside had spent 6 years assembling the terms of a political alliance between Hrothgar's bloodline and a northern noble family, an alliance that required Hrothgar to commit to a specific political mate by the end of the coming year. It was a good alliance. It secured the northern trade routes, it resolved 3 outstanding territorial disputes, and it gave Hrothgar something he had been managing without for a long time, an institutional partner in the court. The wolf statue had just publicly declared, in front of 2 guards and an archivist who wrote everything down, that the Alpha King's true bond had already arrived, through the east gate, in a travelling cloak carrying a box. Corside submitted her petition to the Estate Council on the 7th day. She did not rush it. Rushing would have looked like alarm. An alarm was an admission of weakness. The petition was drafted with the precision of someone who had spent 30 years learning how courts worked and what language they responded to. Its grounds were administrative. The woman had arrived without prior correspondence, without a formal introduction letter from a standing house, and without legitimate claim on estate resources. Every element was technically accurate. None of it named the real concern. 3 days before the petition was filed, Hrothgar moved Revna's work desk to the archive's main cataloguing room. He had done this through his steward, citing a shortage of cataloguing staff that was technically true and strategically useful. He had told no one his reasoning. Aldrin had noted the instruction, noted the timing, and elected to ask no questions, which was one of the qualities that had made him an excellent beta for 8 years. Revna had arrived at the archive to find her name on the duty roster. She had stood reading it for a long moment, long enough that Holt, passing with a stack of folios, had paused to observe her. Then she had set down her bag, hung up her cloak, and gone to work. She had not sought out Hrothgar to thank him. She had not asked for an explanation. She had simply understood what the desk meant, which was that she had been seen, and she had decided that seeing it clearly was sufficient. He found this more affecting than anything she could have said. She had been in the archive for 9 days when he came in during the blue hour before supper and stood in the doorway. Not to speak, he discovered, but simply because the archive was the one room in the estate where the quality of the silence was different. She did not stop working when he appeared. She continued her notation and reached for the next folio, and he watched her hands moving through the work. Careful, efficient, the particular economy of someone who had been trusted with important things for long enough to make the care unconscious. "You corrected the latch yourself," he said. She looked up. The original was failing. "I noticed. At the gate. Before I knew anything else about you, I had already seen that." She was still for a moment. Then she put down her pen and turned in her chair to face him properly. "You changed my shift assignment," she said, "before the petition was filed. Yes? You did it through the steward. You didn't tell me." "No." "Why?" He leaned against the doorframe, and she had the sense of someone choosing what to say. Not performing the choice, but actually making it. "Because you had been careful with something for 2 years, without anyone asking you to, and without anyone noticing," he said. "And I thought someone should notice." She looked at him steadily. The particular steadiness of someone who had learned very precisely what composure cost, and was using it now not to hold herself together, but simply to be fully present in a moment she had not expected. "Thank you," she said, "for the shift." A pause. "I know what you actually meant." He stayed until the light was gone. Neither of them said anything else for a long time, and neither of them minded. The estate council convened on the 14th day since Revna's arrival, in a chamber that smelled of cold stone and long deliberation. Lady Corside had been granted the floor first, as petitioner, and she presented her case with the careful architecture of someone who had rehearsed it enough to make it sound unrehearsed. Lack of formal correspondence, no introduction from a standing house, no established claim. The procedural language was excellent. The procedural language was the entire point. Hrothgar attended. He sat at the head of the table. He did not speak. Revna sat at the far end, below the council member's rank, with Holt to her right, and the iron box on the table in front of her, closed. The council members who looked at her directly saw a young woman with grey eyes and a worn cloak, and no expression that they could read as either submission or defiance, simply presence, the quality of someone paying precise attention. The council members who did not look at her directly were making a choice, and she noted which ones they were. When Corside finished, the chamber secretary asked if the guest wished to respond. "I have a question first," Revna said. Her voice was even, unhurried. The petition cites insufficient introduction documentation from a standing house. Is a sealed document from a house that was standing at the time of sealing considered equivalent to an introduction letter under a state charter? The secretary checked his records. This took some time. The particular silence of a man finding something that was there was different from the silence of a man finding something that was not. There is precedent, the secretary said finally. Section 14 of the estate charter, amended in the 3rd year of the previous Alpha King's reign. A letter sealed before a house's dissolution retains the legal standing of the house at the point of sealing. Revna opened the iron box. The interior was lined with oilcloth, the preservation work of someone who had understood that whatever was inside might need to survive for a very long time. On the top, folded once and sealed with her house's full sigil, was a letter. Below it, packed carefully in order, were materials she had not yet seen, folios, record books, a secondary ledger. But she did not open those now. She lifted the letter, broke the seal, and read it first herself, which was something she had waited 2 years to do. Then she passed it to the secretary. The letter was addressed to the winter estate of the Alpha King's bloodline, and had been written 18 years ago, when Revna had been 4 years old, and the box had been in the custody of an archivist 3 generations back from Holter. It requested, in precise legal language, that when the bearer of the accompanying materials arrived at the estate, she be received in accordance with the terms of an alliance made between the Revna house and Hrothgar's lineage in the reign of the previous Alpha King. The alliance had been filed in triplicate, sealed, and witnessed by the estate's own legal officer. The council secretary looked up from the letter. The look was very specific. It was the look of a man who had understood in the same moment both what the document said and what it meant. He read the relevant section aloud. The chamber was very quiet. "The alliance," Holt said, from his seat at Revna's right, and his voice was the quiet of someone who had been reading about this for 40 years and had come with full documentation to the confirmation, specifies that a member of the Revna house, bearing the archival materials listed in the attached inventory, would be received at this estate in the event of a confirmed Alpha bond. The bond has been confirmed. The bearer has arrived. The materials are present. He paused. We have, I would note, been waiting for this for 400 years and 3 months. The council voted, 4-1. Corside cast the single dissent without visible emotion, and in her eyes, as the count was read, there was no defiance, only the precise recalculation of someone who had made an error in her information and was already determining where the error had entered her strategy. She did not crumble. She did not leave. She would do neither, and Revna had not expected her to. A woman who built influence from procedure did not abandon the institution when the procedure ruled against her. She adapted. Revna sat with both hands flat on the table. She did not perform relief. There was nothing to perform. She had known, when she opened the box and read the letter, that the work was simply finished, and finishing was not the same as drama. Hrothgar had not moved from the head of the table throughout. He had watched her stand in front of the council and present evidence she had been carrying for 2 years without knowing what it contained, and something in him had completed. Not the wolf's recognition, not the supernatural signal of the gate, not any of the language the records used, something quieter and more decided than any of that. He had been paying attention to her for 14 days. He understood now what he had been paying attention to. The corridor outside the council chamber was briefly crowded with people in the particular state of dispersal that follows institutional drama, purposeful movements that had not quite yet attached to actual purposes. Revna was in the middle of it, box under her left arm, when the press shifted without warning, and someone struck her from behind. She caught the wall with her right hand. She caught the box. The crowd had already parted around the space Hrothgar occupied before she registered that he had moved. His hand was at her arm, steadying, certain, and the crowd continued its dispersal around both of them, with the easy unconsciousness of water around stone. He did not release her arm immediately. When she was steady, she did not move away. "Are you—" "Yes, thank you." They were standing close enough that she could see the old scar on his jaw clearly, the one that ran from below his left ear to his chin's edge, in a line that suggested it had been made by a blade and cleaned by someone who knew what they were doing, years before this story started. She had been thinking about that scar since the first morning, in the same patient way she thought about things she had noticed and not yet placed. "The box," he said. "You've had it for 2 years and you never knew what was inside." "No, and you carried it anyway." "Someone trusted me to," she said. "I intended to be worth that." He looked at her. His hand was still at her arm. "Stay," he said. It was not a command. She had heard him give commands, short, certain, with the cadence of someone who expected to be obeyed. And this was not that. Not because of the gate, not because of the statute or the charter. The wolf made its choice 400 years ago. I'm asking because I'm making mine now. She was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the 2 years of roads, the box, the latch she had repaired 3 times, the morning she had arrived at the archive and found her name on the roster. "All right," she said. "That's all? What else would you like?" Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the precursor of one, the thing that happened just before a person allowed themselves to find something pleasant. "Nothing," he said. "That's enough." 3 months settled over the winter estate, like the cold itself, incrementally, thoroughly, until the conditions of it were simply the conditions of being there. The snow continued in the practical way of mountain winter, without drama, as a matter of geography. Revna had learned to read the morning light on the east wall. A particular quality of amber meant temperature staying. A particular pale grey meant it was coming down again before midday. And she was right often enough that Aldrin had taken to stopping at the archive doorway on his way to the main yard, and watching which direction she was looking before he decided whether to request the covered horses. She had her own desk now. It was in the corner of the archive that received the most natural light, which had been Holt's corner, before he had elected to move himself 3 feet to the left, without being asked, citing better access to the eastern shelves, which was partly true. The iron box sat open on the low shelf at her right hand. She had catalogued its contents in the weeks after the council session, 12 items per week, which Holt had described as thorough, and she had described as the correct pace for work you intended to get right. The materials inside had been her house's archival contributions to Hrothgar's lineage going back 3 centuries, folios, records, a secondary ledger that cross-referenced sources the estate's own archive had listed as lost. Holt had wept briefly upon seeing the ledger, one compact, contained moment of feeling, after which he had opened it and begun reading. The wolf statue had been moved. Hrothgar had done this himself, with 2 of his men, and no announcement. It stood now outside the door of his private study, muzzle raised in its attitude of patient attention. The estate staff had responded with the silence of people who had decided not to form a visible opinion and would be carrying that decision to their graves. The statue had turned its head twice more since the gate, both times when Revna came around the corner at the end of the corridor, and she had stopped being startled by this. It was simply the wolf being accurate. Corside remained on the council. Her petition had been struck from record, but she had not resigned her post, and Revna had not expected her to. You did not build 11 years of influence by abandoning it when a single procedural motion failed. They had reached a careful, honest equilibrium. Revna addressed her as Lady Corside. Corside addressed her as the archivist, and both of them were very correct about it, and that was the present state of the matter. Revna thought it would hold for as long as she continued to be worth the courtesy. She intended to continue. Aldrin had taken to leaving council summaries on her desk. She had pointed out that she was an archivist, not the Alpha King's administrative secretary. He had said the distinction was becoming increasingly academic. She had filed the summaries. She was annotating a catalogue entry late in the blue hour of a Tuesday, when Hrothgar came in and stood in the doorframe in his particular way, present, unhurried, the quiet of someone who was there because he wanted to be. "North Road assessors sent their report," he said. "I saw. The spring repair budget runs over by 20%. Closer to 30 on my reading. I was being optimistic." She kept her pen moving. "There is a precedent in the House records for a material exchange arrangement with the border settlements. I can find the specific language if you want to take it to the council." He was quiet. The particular quality of the quiet told her he was looking at her, rather than at the middle distance. She had learned to read the difference, which was a thing you learned about a specific person over time, and not about people in general. "I told Aldrin last night," he said, "that the Northern Road arrangement had been complicated by the border settlement claims." "Yes." "He said you had already found the precedent and had left the relevant folio on his desk." It seemed efficient. It was. A pause. "He asked me why you knew I was going to need it before I did. I told him you were good at your work." "That's accurate." "Yes, it is." He pushed off the door frame and crossed the archive floor, not to the center, not to a formal position, but simply toward her, the way someone moved toward a thing they had decided about. He stopped at the edge of her desk, close enough that the light from the window showed her the scar she had been thinking about since the first morning. "You asked me, the evening of the council session, why I moved your shift," she said. He looked at her. "You didn't ask," she corrected herself. "I told you I knew what you meant." She set down her pen. "I've been thinking about it since, about what it meant that you did it quietly, that you didn't announce it, that you let me find it myself." She met his eyes and held them. "It meant you understood what I was." "What are you?" he said. "Someone who has been carrying things carefully and quietly for a very long time," she said, "for people who mostly did not notice. You noticed. That is everything. That is the thing." He put his forehead against hers, and she felt him exhale. Long and deliberate, the specific release of someone who had been managing the weight of authority so long that the act of setting it down, even for a moment, required the same precision as picking it up. She put her hand against his chest and felt his heartbeat, steady, present, unhurried, and the warmth of him against the cold of the stone room was simply the warmth of him, which was the specific warmth of this specific person, and she stayed very still and let it be enough. The wolf's tail moved, a small arc in the corridor outside, visible at the edge of her sight through the open door. Granite should not have moved that way. She noted this, with the part of her mind that catalogued things accurately, and set it aside for the part of her that was simply present in this room, with this person, on this particular morning. "You're going to have to explain to the council," she said after a time, "that the wolf is alive." "The wolf is not alive. The wolf's tail just moved." "Categorically," he said, with the precise dryness of a man choosing his words carefully, "it is stone." "Categorically," she said, "it just moved." He kissed her once, carefully, with the full attention of someone who had thought about how to do it correctly and decided that slowly was the right answer. The morning light was the pale amber of the east wall on a cold day that would stay cold but not worsen, and outside the corridor the wolf stood in its patient granite patience, muzzle raised, and the day had nothing urgent in it. "Thank you," she said, when the moment had settled into the quiet of two people who have arrived somewhere. "For what, specifically?" he said. "For the desk," she said. "For seeing the latch. For not making me ask for any of it." He was quiet. Then, in the understated manner of someone who had learned that saying the essential thing simply was the only form of honesty worth having, "I sleep better." She looked at him. "Since you arrived," he said. "I sleep better. I noticed it first on the third night. I thought it was irrelevant. I continued to think this for approximately 6 weeks. And then I stopped pretending it was irrelevant." She looked at the iron box open on the shelf. 300 years of her house's careful work finally arrived. The wolf outside the door, facing the corridor with its ancient stone patience. The desk that had been waiting with her name on the roster. "I carried that box for 2 years, not knowing where it was going," she said, "and it went exactly where it was supposed to go. Yes, I find that—" She stopped. Then, "I find I'm all right with having not known. I think I needed not to know, to carry it the way I did." He considered this. "Yes," he said, "I think that's probably right." She went back to her catalogue entry. He stayed until the light changed, leaning against the shelves in the unhurried manner of a man who had nowhere else he needed to be, which was, she was coming to understand, itself a thing that cost him something. It was enough. It was more than enough. Outside, the snow came down in the quiet and practiced way of a winter that knew its work, and the wolf stood in the corridor with its ears forward, and the day was simply itself, ordinary, particular, complete. If you were carrying something heavy and sealed for 2 years, something you were trusted with, and whose purpose you could not see, and you arrived, and it went exactly where it was always meant to go, would you have kept going? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time.